Hey dear patrons, just wanted to give you a little insight into what happens before I shoot one of my videos. We have to have a little communication session with our little fluffy stars. Claudia is looking at me through the doorway like a little creeper. She's probably gonna invade the camera frame at the least opportune moment. But I know how much you guys like seeing those little ears and paws photobombing me. I love it too. Okay, Pirate, are we ready to do this? Yeah? Okay, let's just face the camera. Will we face the camera today? I know you don't like doing this, but let's try this. Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Uri Burstyn. I'm a veterinarian in Vancouver, BC, and welcome to my latest video in which I'm going to continue the recent theme of my videos over the past year, focusing around how to take care of older cats through their chronic health conditions, spurred at least in part by Mr. Pirate's experiences living with kidney disease and thyroid disease and inflammatory bowel disease and doing quite well so far through them. Today's video will talk about how much subcutaneous fluids to give to your cat. We know that subcutaneous fluids are a really important intervention, specifically for cats with kidney disease, but also any time that dehydration is a problem. But there's really a lack of scientific evidence and consensus in the veterinary community about how much and how often to give subcutaneous fluids. But before we get into the video, allow me to give a little plug to my online course on how to care for a new cat. It's a course that's useful for people who are adopting new kittens, adult cats, as well as experienced cat owners who maybe just want a little tune-up on the basics of feline care. And while I'm plugging this course, please allow me to extend a word of thanks to everyone who joined me for the live webinars on this topic. It's been an absolute delight interacting with you guys, and thank you for your contribution and your questions that help me make the course better. And of course, last but not least, if you appreciate the work that I do, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It takes a lot of time off of clinics and out of my main job to make these videos and to share knowledge on how to care for cats on the internet. And I really couldn't do it without the support of all of you guys, and specifically my patrons. So with that said, please pet that like button, squish the subscribe button, and squish that bell notification icon, and let's get going with the video. As I mentioned earlier, there's no real scientific consensus on how much and how often to give fluids to cats. We know that it's very important. We know that it's an absolute life-saving and life-extending measure, particularly with kidney disease. But exactly how much and how often has always been a bit of a mystery to me. So, just a full disclaimer, I'm venturing a little bit off the book and beyond where we can rely on high-quality scientific evidence and into the realm of personal experience, as well as things I've learned just from talking to other veterinarians over the years, attending conferences, discussing this topic, and just trying to figure out how can I best serve my own patients. The goal of subcutaneous fluids, as with any fluid therapy, is to restore fluid deficits. So we know that, for example, cats with chronic kidney disease will be dehydrated no matter how much water they drink because they just pee out water at a faster rate than they can take it in orally. And side note here, a lot of people try to hydrate their cat by giving them fluids with a syringe by mouth. Completely useless, don't do that. There's no way you can replace a meaningful amount of fluids orally in a cat, and the stress and the work you put into that is just better spent elsewhere, like giving subcutaneous fluids. Now, adding water to food can be helpful, assuming it doesn't reduce your cat's food intake, but again, you can only add a little bit of water to food, because if you add too much and make it too mushy, you're reducing its caloric density, and calories are also important to these cats. So subcutaneous fluids are by far the most effective way of replacing total body water deficits at home as an outpatient. In fact, they're so important that I believe that they contribute significantly to the difference in outcomes between dogs and cats when it comes to kidney disease. Cats, when the kidney disease is diagnosed early and managed appropriately, can live for many years with it, with a very high quality of life, whereas dogs' survival times in response to treatments tends to be a lot worse. And I think at least in part that is because we can't really easily rehydrate dogs at home. I mean, we can put dogs in an IV line and have them in hospital for the day getting intravenous fluids, but it's expensive, it requires hospitalization. Most people will not do that regularly, like on a weekly basis for their dog. And subcutaneous fluids aren't really a good option for most dogs because, first of all, dogs are bigger than cats, and in a bigger patient, you just can't give enough fluids. Even like a dog the size of a Labrador requires like a liter to correct its even a minor water deficit. And you're not going to give a liter of subcutaneous fluids, no matter how big the dog is or how good it is. And also dog skin structure doesn't really support this. You know, cats have this wonderful floppy extra skin. You can put a lot of fluids under the skin without causing any discomfort to them. Whereas in dogs, they tend to have a much tighter skin and slightly different collagen proportions in it. So it's not really a good option. Maybe in really tiny dogs. You know, I have one patient who's a Yorkie that's like 3 kilos. Oh, hi, Claudia. Been waiting for you. And this Yorkie's owner is incredibly dedicated, and she brings her dog in like 2 or 3 times a week for us to give subcutaneous fluids to it. And this dog's lived way longer than I expected it to with severe kidney disease. And I mean, partially it's probably luck, partially it's appropriate treatment by yours truly. And at least I think in great part is because we were able to actually hydrate this little dog, which we couldn't do for a larger breed. So anyway, subcutaneous fluids are important. And I have a video on my channel starring Lancelot, or excuse me, Sir Lancelot, on how to administer them. And speaking of which, there's actually a video coming up showing a new technique on how to administer subcutaneous fluids much more effectively. So if you're watching this video in the future, you can check that out. It's a technique that's actually developed not by me or any other veterinarian, but a client of mine who was taking care of his renal cat under my guidance at home, and he's got a bit of a mechanical bent to his mind, and he developed a really cool new system that makes administering subcutaneous fluids much easier. So have a look out for that video on my channel. It probably won't be up at the time that I publish this, but it will be up sooner rather than later. In the meantime, check out the video I have with Lancelot showing how to give subcutaneous fluids the traditional way. We know that fluids are important. We know that pretty much everyone can do this at home, but how much do we give? Now, the good place to start is whatever your veterinarian tells you. And we'll say anything from, you know, every day, every other day, twice a week, once a week. You know, these recommendations are usually based on the blood work, the veterinarian's own personal experience and their impression on physical exam, and they're a really great place to start. However, they can always be refined by the owners at home. At least that's what I believe. And so I have developed the 3 S's to help owners decide at home when their cat needs subcutaneous fluids, or really any kind of hydration. And the 3 S's are skin tent, scruffiness, and stools. So let's start with skin tent or skin turgor, which is the classic measure of hydration in a cat. You often see your veterinarians probably do this during physical exams. They pick up a little skin, give it a gentle twist, and let it go. See how fast it snaps back. You can see on Mr. Pirate right now, it's snapping right back. I gave him fluids yesterday. He's very well hydrated today. This skin tent is a pretty crude measure. Usually picks up dehydration once it's over 5%, which is, you know, not necessarily bad for our purposes, but it's a little crude. It varies between patients. You know, older patients will typically have a slightly slower skin tent. Cats and dogs that have been obese and then lost weight might have slightly reduced skin tent times, but within a patient, it'll be stable. So if once you get used to your cat, you can regularly check their skin tent and you'll tell when it's a little slower. You know, sometimes when you let it go, it takes a little while to go down. You know, if it takes more than like a second or two to go down, your cat is critically dehydrated and subcutaneous fluids aren't going to help. You got to get him to the vet, get him an intravenous fluid therapy. But you can kind of tell, nice and springy, skin springs back right away. Good hydration. Taking a little longer to come back? Probably time for subcutaneous fluids. So skin tent, super easy to do. Everyone can check this at home. You just have to calibrate your eye to your cat. There. The second is scruffiness. You know, when cats become dehydrated, they just start looking ill-kempt. You know, their coat starts getting all clumped up, the hair looks rough, their face might become kind of bony and skeletal looking. I mean, in really extreme dehydration, their eyes even can become a little sunken in, although by that point, again, you should probably be going to the vet for intravenous fluid therapy. But again, with experience, if you just get used to looking at your little cat, you'll be able to tell. They just have scruffy days sometimes where they look kind of ill-kempt and their fur is all sticking out in bunches versus glossy, shiny fur looks like they're little kitten days. And again, I think that is quite predictive of their dehydration. So if your cat starts looking scruffy, maybe check the skin tent. And if it's a little bit slow, time to give subcutaneous fluids. Conversely, if your cat looks nice and glossy and the skin snaps back and the fluids are due, well, maybe you can skip that day. Great, have a party. Life's just gotten a little bit easier for you and your cat. And the third S is stools. So as I mentioned in my video on constipation, dehydration is the most common underlying cause for constipation. And of course, in a cat with chronic health issues, particularly chronic kidney disease, That dehydration will be due to the kidneys and easily correctable with subcutaneous fluids most of the time. So if your cat is pooping every day and the poops look normal, good stuff, appropriate hydration levels. The fluids might even look a little wetter than normal, and maybe we're overdoing it. However, if the stools start looking really dry, and maybe less of them than normal, then chances are you waited too long to give subcutaneous fluids. Give the fluids, stools should return to normal, then you know you've corrected dehydration. Even more importantly, there should be a bowel movement every day, assuming the cat's eating normally. If there's no poop in the litter box for a day or two, you can be pretty certain that we're dehydrated and we're probably heading into clinically significant constipation. If you haven't given fluids already, time to do it. Or if you have, time to do more. So there's your 3 S's: skin tint, scruffiness, and stools. You can monitor those to tell whether your cat's dehydrated. And you can start with whatever your veterinarian tells you to, both in terms of volume and frequency, and potentially make little adjustments based on these 3 criteria. Maybe give fluids a little bit more often on bad days, and maybe give them a little bit less often when the cat's doing really well, because certainly fluid requirements will fluctuate, and whatever empirical place we start from, it can probably be improved on with appropriate observation. The other part of the equation is how much fluids to give. And again, this is where evidence is lacking and veterinarians just do whatever like their first boss told them to, or whatever their professor in vet school may have mentioned offhand, but approaches vary widely, but I think they all kind of come to pretty much the same volume most of the time. So I'll tell you guys how I decide how much fluids to prescribe to my patients, but of course you should also talk this over with your family veterinarian. So the way I think about it is 5% dehydration is significant. So you take your cat's body weight in kilograms, multiply that by 1,000, so 5.14 kilogram cat, it's 5,140 grams. 5% of that is your fluid deficit, and that's kind of what I aim to replace with subcutaneous fluids. For most cats, it'll end up being somewhere between 200 and 300 mils. It's pretty standard. In some cases, it might be tuned down. For example, if your cat has a heart murmur or heart disease, your veterinarian will recommend lower fluid rates, and you should really listen to them. In fact, if your cat has heart disease or a heart murmur, disregard most of this video and just really talk it over with your veterinarian before making any changes to fluid therapy. But yeah, it usually falls somewhere in the 200 to 300 mil range. And again, this is something you could potentially adjust based on the 3 S's. If your cat is looking pretty good, but you feel like you should give fluids, you can probably give a little bit less, maybe 150 mils or 100. And if your cat's looking scruffy, then maybe aim for the upper end of that range. And again, this also varies by cat's weight, right? If you have a 3 kilogram cat, you probably won't ever be giving more than about 200 cc's. On the other hand, if your cat's like 6.5 kilos, then you're probably going to be giving closer to 250 or maybe even 300. Again, when in doubt, talk it over with your vet. But the 3 S's should provide a convenient and easy to follow guideline for making decisions at home and adjusting therapy to fit your cat as an individual. Thank you very much for watching this video. I sincerely hope you find it helpful and it helps you take care of your little kitty just a little bit better. Thank you again for watching, and I wish you all a very, very lovely day. And Mr. Pirate wishes to have more food. All right, little Chumpalumpa, time to go eat.